Have you ever noticed that many of the most beautiful women in the world seem to never grow up inside? No matter how old they are, they always have something childlike about them. That sweet way of speaking, that innocent laugh, that carefree air, as if life never weighed on them. But behind all that, there's something almost no one sees. It's not a coincidence. It's not just charm. It's a way of living, a way of protecting themselves. From a young age, they discover that beauty opens doors, that a smile can change how others treat them, that being pretty means being listened to, admired, cared for. And with time, they learn something even more powerful. There's no need to grow up if the world rewards you for staying charming. The sweeter they seem, the more attention they get, and little by little, they start confusing affection with admiration, love with approval. The strange thing is that though they appear confident, many of them live in fear. Fear of losing the only thing that makes them feel valuable, their attractiveness. That's why they cling to the image of the eternal girl, to that naive version no one wants to see disappear. But there's a very high price to stay that way, because when a woman lives off her charm, she stops growing. And when she stops growing, she begins to empty inside. Stay until the end, because today you'll understand why beauty can become a prison, and why many of the most admired women never truly mature, even if they seem to have it all. Society trains them without them even noticing. Since childhood, every compliment becomes a small dose of approval, a drug that gradually builds their identity. They're told, "You're so pretty," but rarely, "You're so smart," "You're so brave," or "You're so strong." They grow up understanding that their value lies in being admired, not understood. That's how the trap forms. They learn to shine without depth, to stand out without substance, to be liked without knowing themselves. The problem is that when your whole life revolves around being desired, you stop asking who you really are when no one's watching. And there comes a point when that charming smile turns into a mask. Not because they want to lie, but because they no longer know how to live without it. Being attractive becomes an obligation, a role they must play every day, even when they're broken inside. They look in the mirror searching for security, but they only see a manufactured version of themselves, one that depends on the reflection in others' eyes. On the outside, they seem perfect. On the inside, they're exhausted. Not because they can't grow, but because the world doesn't let them. Every time they try to show a more serious or deeper side, someone tells them they're no longer as charming. And so they pretend again. They become little girls again. But female childishness isn't just a cultural inheritance, it's also an unconscious strategy. Staying young inside means avoiding the pain of responsibility, the weight of emotional independence. Being a girl gives them permission not to face the judgment of the adult world, not to confront disappointment, not to make hard decisions. It's easier to say, "I don't know," with a smile than to admit, "I'm afraid." It's more comfortable to seem fragile than to face the loneliness of maturity. That's why many hide behind the character the world applauds, even if they're empty inside, even if silence devours them when the lights go out. No one teaches them that beauty has a psychological price. When everyone looks at you, you stop looking at yourself. When everyone tells you who you are, you stop discovering it on your own. And so, the attractive woman ends up living for others, trapped between the mirror and another's gaze. Her identity depends on external desire. And when that desire disappears, she feels she stops existing. That's the root of immaturity, never having learned to stand without validation. The saddest part is that the world fuels this prison. It sells them the idea that their power lies in their body, their smile, their charm. It tells them they can have everything if they know how to play the game. But it doesn't warn them that the game always ends the same way, with an awkward silence when the applause stops. Maturity demands losing the need to please, and for those who've lived off charm, that feels like dying. Because for many of them, to stop being desired is to disappear. And here comes the most unsettling part. Some don't want to grow up not because they can't, but because they're afraid of what they'd discover if they did. Growing up would mean seeing the truth, that their power didn't come from the soul, but from the reflection, that their self-esteem wasn't born within, but from the echo of others. Eyes, that their sweetness deep down was a shield. When they realize that, the illusion collapses and the real woman appears, the one who's been hidden for years beneath layers of emotional makeup. But that moment, though painful, is also the beginning of true freedom, because maturity doesn't come with age. It comes with awareness. And many of the most attractive women in the world haven't yet had time to look at themselves without filters. They're terrified to do so. They don't know who they are beyond the character. And until they dare to break that childish image, they'll remain prisoners of their own charm, eternal girls in adult bodies, seeking love in the world's eyes instead of finding it within themselves. And the most ironic part? The world applauds that prison. It calls it femininity, disguises it as charm, sells it as a virtue. The softer, gentler, more dependent they seem, the more they're admired. It's the old trick. Society loves beautiful women as long as they remain harmless. It wants them beautiful but not free, desirable but not wise, seductive but not self-aware. Because a woman who truly matures, who looks at herself without fear, who stops needing approval, can no longer be controlled. And that's frightening. That's why the system pushes so many to stay in that version of themselves. The eternal girl, the one who smiles even when she's broken, who stays quiet to avoid discomfort, who pretends not to understand just to seem adorable. That version attracts but never threatens, and thus the perfect balance remains. A woman trapped between desire and submission, believing she has power when she's only wearing a disguise. Beauty without awareness is a trap. It gives power, yes, but a borrowed one, a power that depends on others' attention. It's like living with a candle lit in the wind. As long as there are eyes watching, it shines, but when the gazes fade, it dies out. True strength isn't in being admired, but in being able to be alone without falling apart. And for many women used to living off reflection, that's the hardest test. Do you know what's most cruel? The same world that lifted them up later punishes them. When youth fades, when the skin stops glowing, when eyes turn toward someone younger, then comes the fall. A silent fall, unseen in public, but felt inside like a collapse. Suddenly, everything that gave them worth disappears, and they realize they never learned to be anything other than desired. They don't know how to be admired for their mind or respected for their character because no one ever taught them to build that. They were left trapped in a golden cage, beautiful but empty. And here comes the darkest truth. Many don't just fear losing their attractiveness, they fear losing their identity. Because if you stop being the beautiful one, who are you? If the world stops looking at you, do you still exist? It's a crisis no one sees, but it burns from within. That's why some obsess over staying young, not out of vanity, but out of fear of disappearing. They inject youth into their skin because they don't know how to put it into their soul. Deep down, what they're seeking isn't beauty, it's validation. They don't want a wrinkle-free face. They want to feel that they still matter. But here's what almost no one says. Maturity doesn't take anything away from them. On the contrary, it gives them back what was always theirs. Because when a woman stops acting to please and starts acting to be, something is born that no makeup or filter can create. Power. Not the power of being desired, but the power of being respected, feared, admired for who she truly is. The mature woman doesn't need to fake sweetness to be heard, or hide her intelligence to be accepted. She's seen the mechanism, dismantled it, and chosen to step out of the role. That's the real revolution, and yet the fear remains. Because growing up means losing something, the comfort of constant approval, the ease of attention, the safety of a familiar role. It means accepting that true love doesn't always applaud you, that freedom has a price, and that price is solitude. Most aren't willing to pay it. They'd rather stay where the applause never stops, even if that stage is a prison. But those who dare, those who break the image and walk through the pain, discover a new kind of beauty. A beauty that doesn't depend on anyone's eyes. That beauty can't be painted on, measured, or wilt. It's born from clarity, from the serenity of knowing you are enough. It's the beauty of a woman who no longer needs to be a girl to feel alive, who no longer uses fragility as a strategy, but intelligence as a weapon. It's the beauty of a woman who no longer seeks love, but real connection. And when a woman reaches that point, her power becomes immeasurable. The world doesn't know what to do with a woman like that. Because she can't be manipulated, she doesn't ask permission, she doesn't need approval. She speaks without fear, looks without lowering her eyes, loves without begging for affection. And the most striking thing? She no longer fears aging, because she understands that time doesn't take away her value. It only removes her masks. Maturity makes her dangerous, not because her face changes, but because her gaze does. A gaze that no longer seeks to be admired, but to be understood. But to reach that point, one must first break the mirror. You have to let the girl the world rewarded die, and give life to the woman who's always been waiting behind her. And yes, it hurts, but it also sets you free. Because when a woman stops being the character others created for her, she finally begins to write her own story. One without filters, without poses, without fear of losing her shine. A story where beauty isn't about perfection, but about awareness. And that, though few will say it, is the most feared secret of all. A conscious woman cannot be tamed. She cannot be manipulated. She cannot be convinced by flattery or chained by desire. A conscious woman doesn't need to be eternal because she knows eternity isn't in youth, but in authenticity. And right there, that's where childishness dies and true freedom is born. And it's curious, because when a woman begins to awaken, when she starts to question the role the world imposed on her, something strange happens. The world reacts. Suddenly, those who once admired her feel uncomfortable. She's not the same anymore. She doesn't smile by habit. She doesn't seek approval with her eyes. And that unsettles people. Because the world doesn't want real women. It wants versions it can control. It prefers sweetness to truth, obedience to authenticity. When an attractive woman stops behaving as expected, she stops being adorable and becomes difficult. But what the world calls difficult is, in reality, independence. Female independence holds something the system cannot tolerate. It breaks the logic of exchange. For years, many women have learned to use their attractiveness as currency. But when they realize they don't need to buy affection with charm, everything changes. They stop playing the game. They stop negotiating their worth. And that, for those who benefit from their childishness, is a threat. Because the conscious woman doesn't play at being saved. nor seeks to be understood by those who only see the surface. She saves herself, understands herself, and in doing so leaves a huge void in the system that once fed on her dependence. The most fascinating thing is that when they leave the character behind, many discover something no one ever told them. Their attractiveness doesn't disappear, it transforms. It's no longer a beauty that begs for attention, but a presence that commands respect. She no longer seeks to seduce, she seeks to connect. And there lies the secret the world refuses to accept. The mature woman doesn't lose her charm, she elevates it, because her power stops being a visual illusion and becomes a real, magnetic energy that can't be faked. And now that we've made it this far, before we continue, I want to present the following to you. Our book, The Formula of Awakening, is now available. Do you feel like there's something inside you that wants to awaken, but you don't know where to start? Then I invite you to transform your way of thinking, and with it, your way of living. Discover who you can become. Start today. The link to get the ebook is in the first pinned comment of this video. Grab your copy now at a great price. With that said, let's continue with the video. And yet, that transformation doesn't come without loss. They must say goodbye to the girl the world adored, that naive, compliant, smiling version that never complained. They must kill her symbolically to be reborn. And yes, that's frightening, because deep down, that girl protected them. She helped them survive, adapt, be loved. But what helps you survive doesn't always help you live. At some point, you must stop pretending fragility and start truly standing on your own. The problem is that most don't know how, because they were never taught to know themselves beyond the mirror. And here is where psychology becomes crucial. Female childishness is, in many cases, a response to an early emotional wound. The need to be loved unconditionally. When a girl learns that affection only comes when she pleases, she repeats that pattern her whole life. She flirts, she smiles, she disguises herself as innocence, because deep down, she fears that if she stops doing so, love will vanish. The saddest part is that most aren't even aware of it. They think they're choosing who they are, but they're obeying emotional programming. The most powerful moment comes when they discover that wound and decide to heal it. When they realize they can be loved without performing, without decorating themselves, without pretending. That love worth having isn't earned, it's shared. That you don't have to be adorable to be worthy. That moment is like breaking a spell. Because then, for the first time, they can look at themselves without fear and recognize themselves without makeup, without the weight of others' desires. They can say, I no longer need to please, I just need to be. And then, the unthinkable happens. Silence stops being frightening. They no longer need the noise of others' eyes to feel alive. They can be alone without feeling empty. They start enjoying their own company, finding pleasure in calm, in thought, in creation. And that, in a world addicted to distractions and illusions, is a silent revolution. Because do you know what happens when a woman stops depending on external attention? She starts seeing the world differently. She no longer sees competition. She sees mirrors. She no longer seeks comparison. She seeks understanding. She stops seeing other women as rivals and begins to see them as allies. And there, another cycle breaks. The cycle of female rivalry imposed by a system that needs them divided to keep them asleep. When a woman truly matures, she doesn't compete, she uplifts. She doesn't imitate, she inspires. And the most beautiful thing is that, in doing so, she rediscovers her femininity, but from a deeper place. A femininity that doesn't need to be perfect, only present. One that isn't defined by her body, but by her mind. One that doesn't depend on others' desire, but on her own. A femininity that no longer fears aging, because she understands that time doesn't destroy beauty, it refines it. The woman who has gone through all of this, who has broken the role of the eternal girl, becomes something few can truly comprehend. A force that can't be explained, only felt. She no longer lives to please, she lives to exist. She no longer decorates herself, she expresses herself. She no longer seeks approval, she seeks truth. And when she reaches that point, the entire society trembles, because her power can no longer be reduced to a pretty face or a figure. It's a power that asserts itself without permission, that inspires without demanding attention, that leaves a mark without needing to be seen. And maybe that's the world's greatest fear. A woman who doesn't need applause to shine. Because when such a woman appears, the game is over. No one can control someone who has understood her own worth. And in that moment, the spell of childishness breaks forever, and something is born that can never die. The conscious woman, the free woman, the woman who doesn't look at herself to please, but to recognize herself. And if you've made it this far, then you already know something, even if you haven't said it out loud. Attraction without awareness is only a fleeting reflection, but the gaze of a woman who has found herself, that's eternal. Because when a woman awakens, she doesn't just free herself, she shakes the world that wanted her asleep. Maybe that's why the most beautiful ones don't grow up. Because growing up hurts, because growing up destroys everyone's fantasies. But if you ever dare to look within, to drop the mask, you'll discover something no superficial beauty can match, the peace of being yourself, with nothing left to pretend. And now I invite you to do something. Write in the comments a phrase that sums up what touched you the most in this video. I want to read your truth, your experience, your awakening, and if this made you think, if it stirred something inside you, subscribe. Not because I say so, but because here we talk about what no one dares to say. See you in the next video. Or maybe not. Maybe you'll just hear my voice in your head, right when you finally see yourself clearly in the mirror. That's when you'll know this message wasn't a video, it was a mirror.